Now that we've got our space or spaces, it's time to trade paper. There are a few terms we use interchangeably here. Trading paper means exchanging LOIs. LOI, again, stands for letter of intent, and we may also say proposal or term sheet. We use all of these terms to mean the same thing in retail deals. I'd said to budget 3 to 6 months for this process. During this stage, we're negotiating the most essential, high-level business terms under which we'd lease a space. We're hammering out the basic economics, rent and concessions, as well as details like how we're permitted to use the space, what are our hours of operation, that kind of thing. Usually, we're going to exchange several rounds of proposals for each space, and basically every term is negotiable. Your advisor will help you stay focused on what's the most important and the overall goal, because at the end of a negotiation, the proposal is usually a huge mess of a red line with very little text surviving from the first round. An LOI is not legally binding, and it's common practice to negotiate several LOIs at the same time before choosing one to move forward with. You want to understand what the best possible terms are before committing to a space. Near the end of an LOI negotiation, you will need to produce your financials. Usually we're looking for 2 to 3 years tax returns and a financial statement. If your business has been around long enough to have those things, the company's financials should be sufficient, but if not, they'll be looking at your personal financials and those of any of your partners. A landlord is looking to assess creditworthiness and also determine what kind of security deposit they'll require. More on that in a future video. If you're looking at your bank account and freaking out, don't worry. Deals very rarely die because of weak financials. If you're a new business, the expectation is that you're going to need to raise money. No one is expecting national credit. Once you sign an LOI, the norm is to stop negotiating other LOIs. They're not legally binding, and while some do explicitly state that you're going to stop other negotiations, it's really not enforceable. But we almost always do stop for 2 reasons. Of course, it's a show of good faith for the relationship to come, but it's also practical. Once you start negotiating a lease, both parties will be using lawyers to draft and negotiate that document, who almost always charge hourly for time spent. Neither side wants to start incurring legal costs unless they're seriously committed to a deal. We're kicking tires at the LOI stage because it doesn't cost us anything, but we wouldn't waste the money of negotiating 2 leases at once if we know we're only going to sign one. That's why we spent the time to try to identify any potential deal killers during the LOI. We're trying not to waste legal fees on leases we ultimately won't sign. Turning to who's involved. Of course, your advisor or broker, or the broker on the other side of the deal, and their client, the landlord, are all of the primary players. But as you get serious about a space, it's a good idea to have your construction team take a closer look. I'd recommend spending the money to have a proper test fit or layout done, as well as a more detailed budget estimate. After all, how can you negotiate economics without a really good sense of your build-out costs? And as you get closer to finalizing economics, you may want to communicate that back to your investors or lender. If you're getting a bank loan, the bank often needs the specific economics of a deal to be able to move ahead in the approval process, and especially if you're seeking an SBA loan, you want to get the process started as soon as humanly possible. You're working with the government, and things just tend to move at their own pace. Delays in funding can obviously have a big impact on that overall timeline. At the end of the LOI stage, you have a fully negotiated LOI ready to be fleshed out into a lease.